Good morning, and let me say something that might completely change the way you think about growing older on your own. Because what you're about to hear isn't the version of aging most people get told about at their yearly checkup, and it's definitely not the version that gets talked about at the dinner table. If you are a man over 60 living alone, or if you love someone who is, then the next few minutes could genuinely shift how you think about the years ahead. Here's the reality nobody wants to say out loud. Men who live alone in their 60s, 70s, and 80s face a measurably higher risk of physical and cognitive decline than men who live with a partner or family. But here's the part almost nobody talks about. The men in that same group who understood 5 specific realities about their situation and adjusted for them on purpose didn't just close that gap. Many of them ended up healthier, sharper, and more resilient than men their age who technically had more support around them. Today I want to walk you through those 5 realities, counting down from the one that surprises people the least to the one I consider the single most important thing an older man living alone can understand about his own health. And before we get into it, I want to ask you something directly. Drop your age in the comments and tell me, are you living alone right now, or are you watching this because of someone you care about? I want to know who's actually in this room with me today, because everything in this video is built for you specifically. Coming in at number 5 is something that sounds almost too simple to matter, and that's exactly why it gets ignored. It's the loss of natural structure in the day. When you live with someone else, your day gets shaped for you without you even noticing. Meals happen at certain times because someone else is hungry too. You go to bed near the same hour because someone else is turning off the lights. You talk in the morning because someone else is standing in the kitchen. Live alone, and every single one of those natural anchors disappears unless you rebuild them on purpose. Researchers who study circadian rhythm, the internal clock that governs your sleep, your hormones, and your energy, have long pointed out that this clock relies heavily on consistent external cues, what scientists sometimes call zeitgebers, things like light, meals, and social contact happening at predictable times. When those cues vanish, the clock drifts, and when it drifts, everything downstream drifts with it. Sleep gets lighter, mood gets flatter, energy becomes unpredictable. Think about someone like Raymond, a retired tradesman in his early 70s, who told me once that his days had stopped having a shape. He'd wake up whenever, eat whenever, and by evening he genuinely couldn't tell you what he'd done that day. That's not laziness. That's a nervous system that lost its scaffolding. The fix isn't complicated, but it has to be deliberate. Waking at the same time daily, getting outside in real daylight within the first hour or 2 of the morning, and eating your first meal at a consistent hour rebuilds the scaffolding your body used to get for free. It costs nothing, and the return on it, in mood and sleep quality alone, is significant. Moving to number 4, and this is where nutrition and aging collide in a way most people never get warned about. It's called anabolic resistance, and it's the reason a man can eat the exact same diet at 70 that he ate at 40 and still lose muscle. As the body ages, muscle tissue simply becomes less responsive to protein. It takes more of it, eaten more deliberately, to trigger the same muscle-building response that used to happen automatically. And here's where living alone compounds the problem in a very specific way. Cooking for one is harder to sustain than cooking for 2 or more. Appetite tends to fade with age and with isolation, and protein-rich foods, meat, fish, eggs, dairy, often take more effort to prepare than the easy fallback of toast or cereal. Over time, this adds up to a slow, quiet loss of muscle mass, what's medically known as sarcopenia, which is strongly linked to falls, frailty, and loss of independence in later life. Picture someone like George, a retired coach who noticed his shirts fitting differently and assumed it was just age catching up to him. It wasn't inevitable. It was a protein gap that had crept in slowly over years. The practical fix researchers consistently point to is spreading protein across all 3 meals rather than loading it all into dinner, aiming for a source of protein at breakfast just as much as at lunch and dinner, since muscle synthesis responds better to steady input than to one large evening dose. Pairing that with regular movement, even walking, helps the body actually use that protein instead of just processing it. Now we're at number 3, and this is a topic I think deserves far more attention than it gets, because it doesn't just affect how tired you feel, It affects how your brain ages. It's the quality, not just the quantity, of your sleep. Doctors and patients alike tend to focus on how many hours someone slept, but sleep isn't one uniform state. It cycles through stages, including deep sleep, the stage where the body does its heaviest repair work, where growth hormone is released, and where the brain runs what researchers call its glymphatic clearance system, essentially flushing out cellular waste that builds up during the day. Deep sleep naturally declines with age for everyone, but researchers who study sleep in isolated older adults have found that living alone often makes this worse. Through irregular bedtimes, elevated evening stress hormones with no one around to help regulate them, and reduced feelings of safety at night, all of which interfere with the deeper stages of sleep specifically. Someone like Harold, a retired accountant who insisted he'd never had trouble sleeping, technically wasn't wrong. He fell asleep easily and stayed asleep for hours, but a closer look at his actual sleep pattern showed he was barely reaching deep sleep at all, which is why he woke up every day feeling foggy, despite a full night in bed. Simple, well-supported changes make a real difference here. Eating your last meal at least a few hours before bed instead of right before sleep. Keeping the bedroom on the cooler side, since research on sleep architecture consistently shows cooler temperatures support deeper sleep stages, and anchoring your wake time even on weekends, since irregular sleep schedules are one of the most disruptive things you can do to your own sleep quality. Now for number 2, and this is the fact I promised you at the start, the one that almost every older man is quietly getting wrong. It's about strength, but not in the way most people picture it. It's about a specific kind of muscle fiber called fast-twitch fibers, the fibers responsible not for endurance, but for speed and explosive power, the kind of strength that lets you catch yourself when you trip, or push yourself up quickly off a low chair. Here's the part that surprises people. After 60, fast-twitch fibers decline faster than the slow-twitch fibers responsible for endurance, which is exactly why a man can walk 4 miles a day, feel perfectly fit, and still have a serious fall, because walking trains endurance beautifully, but does almost nothing to preserve the fast, reactive strength that prevents a stumble from turning into a fall. Researchers who study aging and resistance training have found that the fibers responsible for quick, powerful movement respond specifically to training that involves deliberate, intentional speed of effort, not necessarily heavy weight, but purposeful, forceful movement. Things like standing up from a chair quickly, stepping up onto a low step with intent, or pushing against a wall with real effort. Think of someone like Walter, a disciplined daily walker who was genuinely shaken after tripping on an uneven sidewalk despite being, by his own account, in great shape. His cardiovascular fitness was fine. What he was missing was reactive power, and that only comes from training that specifically asks the body to move with speed and intention, not just distance. 2 sessions a week of simple resistance movement done with deliberate effort, squats, step-ups, push-offs, done with intent rather than casually, is enough to start rebuilding that kind of strength, and pairing it with a source of protein afterward helps the muscle actually use the training. And now, number 1, the reality I think matters more than any of the other 4 combined, and the one that mainstream health advice talks about the least, given how much damage it actually does. It's chronic loneliness, and I want to be clear, this isn't a conversation about feelings as a matter of mood. This is measurable biology. Some of the most respected longitudinal research on adult health, including decades-long studies out of Harvard tracking the same men across their entire lives, has found that the strength of a person's relationships is one of the single strongest predictors of healthy aging, in some analyses outperforming cholesterol levels or even genetics. Separately, large-scale research on social isolation has repeatedly linked chronic loneliness to elevated inflammation, weakened immune response, and a meaningfully increased risk of early mortality, with some researchers comparing the health impact of prolonged isolation to that of regular smoking. The mechanism matters here. When the brain registers chronic isolation, it doesn't just create sadness, it shifts the body into a defensive state, upregulating inflammatory activity as though preparing for injury, while quietly deprioritizing the kind of cellular repair and immune regulation the body does during periods of safety and connection. Isolation has even been linked in some research to accelerated cellular aging markers, suggesting the body genuinely ages faster under chronic loneliness. And here's where men, specifically, face a compounding disadvantage. Research on social networks in later life has repeatedly found that men are more likely than women to have relied on a spouse as their primary, sometimes only, close confidant, while women more often maintain independent friendships throughout life. When that spousal relationship ends, through death, divorce, or distance, many men are left with a kind of social gap they were never taught to notice or repair. Think of someone like Thomas, a sharp, capable retired engineer, self-sufficient by every measure, who without quite realizing it had gone down to only 1 or 2 real conversations a week for years. He wasn't depressed by his own account, he was fine, he said. But fine and thriving are not the same thing, and when he started showing up weekly to a local hobby group, not because the hobby mattered so much as the people did, the change in his energy, appetite, and outlook over the following months was significant. Researchers who study social connection and health suggest a rough but useful benchmark, aiming for several genuine social interactions a week, in person, by phone, or by video call, with people who actually know you, seems to matter more than one long visit occasionally, because the nervous system responds to consistency, not just volume. And this is the thread that ties everything back together, because connection makes the earlier structure easier to maintain. It makes cooking and eating protein feel worthwhile again, instead of like a chore for one. It lowers the evening stress that disrupts deep sleep, and it gives you a reason to show up for the kind of movement that preserves real strength. None of these 5 realities exist in isolation. They reinforce each other, for better or worse. If you take one thing away from this video, let it be this: living alone does not have to mean declining alone. It changes what you have to do on purpose that used to happen automatically, but every single thing on this list is something you can start adjusting starting tomorrow. Morning light and a steady wake time, protein spread across your meals, protecting your deep sleep, training your body with real intent twice a week, and reaching, even when it feels awkward, toward the people who make your week feel like it mattered. If any part of this gave you something you're actually going to use, let me know in the comments. Tell me your age, tell me whether you're living this right now or watching out for someone who is, and tell me which of these 5 hit you the hardest. I read every comment, and this content exists because of the people who show up in them.